Just another thought that I had while I was walking around, conception of China being a communist country, and before coming here you're imagining this, marching groups of people, red everywhere, and everything is communal, as communist is sort of promoted.
Hello amazing viewer, delighted to have you once more at Comfort for Life. I bring to you compilations of TikTok and Red Note videos for educational purposes. If you are new here, consider subscribing, and to my returning viewers, I love and appreciate you. Thank you so much for keeping it up here. You guys are the real MVP. When it comes to China, there are so many topics that are misunderstood, especially this topic on the system of governance operational in China. And I want to believe that those who advocate passionately against communism and socialism share the same conception. So this guy traveled to China and he imagined a community, a society where everything will be communal. And this is the most disturbing thing when it comes to educating people about China, because most people's arguments are based on illusion, on misinformation, on biasness. And in this compilation, we are going to get deeply into this, and I hope it's going to be an amazing compilation. Kindly smash that like button and let's dive in.
This is totally regular consumer society. So everyone's out shopping, everyone's out just buying. It doesn't seem like the ideas of communism as I sort of perceive them exist here. It's just consumerist society. Maybe the difference that the market is here not exactly free to the powers of the market, but is regulated by the government, which is not necessarily a bad thing. They try to create a fairer competition for entrepreneurs and businesses, but everything is here run privately. And I keep asking the people I meet here, and it's like, okay, so what services the government actually provide? Most of the answers are like, no, these are private companies that, just the government oversees, but in the end, they are the ones that are providing the service. Anyway, interesting.
I've seen several different videos come across my For You page of leftists saying that we should not focus on China as a subject because it's divisive and because it creates infighting between leftists. China is the most important political subject that there is for leftists to discuss, actually. In fact, all American policy, foreign and domestic, is almost entirely predicated on overcoming China. Whether or not you think that China is a socialist country, the US understands Chinese economic institutions and Chinese policy as socialist policy. What do I mean by that? I'm going to give a literal example. When China engages in trade in the global south, we'll pretend that this is a matter of gold. We'll say that there's 5 gold nuggets that you and I'm the US, you're China, that we're trying to access. As the US, my goal is to produce capital. I want to capitalize off of these 5 gold nuggets as much as possible. I don't have an interest in paying workers who mined the gold. I don't have interest in paying workers who refine the gold. I don't have interest in paying people who extract the gold and bring it to the US. I'm going to minimize those labor costs as much as possible. That's what capitalism is. It's to exploit, and if possible, wherever possible, to create slavery so that people don't have to be paid at all for their work for getting that gold, especially not paying the country that gold, those 5 nuggets of gold are from. China's policy is completely different in that China tends to invest in the state government in order for a state to fortify itself, and it looks for ways to have access to the fairest trade possible, often even forgiving loans that China gives out to members of the global south. So if you were China, you would not be looking to exploit because your economic system is not predicated on generating the most amount of money. Your economic system is humanist. It is interested in making sure that everybody is paid for their labor because it views the long-term institution of communism as a survival for the human race, but also as a economically sound structure. Because capitalism requires overconsumption and overproduction. This is why the US continues to produce all of these vehicles when instead of investing in public infrastructure to have public transit be more accessible and more ecologically friendly, which is what China does do. China has an equally as advanced system of trains as Japan does. In fact, Japan imports a lot of its parts from China. So domestically, the US is hell bent on ensuring that Americans believe every single possible piece of propaganda there could be about China, because leftists in the US have one meaningful socialist project to point to say communism and socialist policy, when implemented, works. And it doesn't just work, it works better than capitalism ever has. But Americans are so intellectually flimsy that they tend to believe propaganda. They don't go and read scientific journals. They don't go and try to find unbiased academic sources. They don't go and read basic documents like the Chinese constitution. A lot of people believe that China's heavily censored. This is not an accurate way to portray China. The US is heavily censored. China heavily censors misinformation. This is a completely different approach to censorship. All that health information that's like essentially pro-anorexia information that floats all over the internet in the US would never be allowed in China because it would be considered medical disinformation, which is actually illegal in China. That's the kind of censorship that the US is referring to. That's the freedom of speech that you're talking about. And if you go to China, the difference that you will find will literally shock you. Don't let the US catch you going to China, because it will literally shock you. And thus, one of the best tools that communists in the US have is pointing out China as an example of successful socialist policy and development. This is why the US depowers all other socialist countries and says, look at how bad this socialism is working. Meanwhile, they're starving people out with sanctions. It is just incorrect to think of China as something that does not affect socialists in the US. It is the only project that Americans have the ability to, leftists in the world have to point to justify implementing real socialist policy.
Why does America hate communism and socialism so much? Why are they willing to wage decade-long wars like they did in Vietnam to prevent the spread of communism? Why is it so threatening, even all across the world? Oil. It's oil, well, and other energy and mineral resources. A big component of the communist and socialist economic model is that countries would get to own their own resources, which undermines Western companies' dominance and ownership of their resources. Capital accumulation heavily depends on dominating resources and cheap labor in foreign soil. The US-based Chiquita Fruit Company, which controlled vast amounts of land and agricultural production in Guatemala, played a role in planning a coup to topple the threat of a socialist president in the 50s. Venezuela nationalized their own oil, and American oil companies which extracted from Venezuela did not like this. Iran's nationalization of their oil in the 50s led to America and Britain orchestrating a coup to get rid of their democratically elected government and the most progressive government Iran has ever seen, which severely destabilized the country for years to come. I made a more detailed video about Iran specifically. I'll link it below. There are so many examples of this. I'm barely scratching the surface here. I recommend reading about each and every one of these. Propaganda will always be thick against any nation that resists Western enterprise dominance.
The United States hates communist countries because we can't benefit off of a country if their resources are owned by the people. I'll repeat. The United States hates communist countries because we can't benefit off of a country if their resources are owned by the people. And by benefit, I mean we can't exploit them. At its core, the ultimate goal of communism is to create a system where the wealth and resources are owned by the people for the people. It's called nationalization. On the other hand, capitalism is based on private ownership, where individuals and corporations control the resources, and individuals and corporations are the ones who benefit. For example, prior to 1959, U.S. corporations used to own a large portion of Cuba's sugar plantations, oil refineries, and their banks, until Fidel Castro came along and he nationalized these industries, effectively taking money away from U.S. corporations and distributing the wealth back into their own country and to their own people. And in response, the U.S. decimated their entire economy. It's the same reason why we invaded Vietnam. They wanted to nationalize their industries that were largely owned by French corporations. Nearly 4 million people died during the Vietnam War. 4 million people sacrificed in order to protect capitalism, to protect the ability for wealth to continue flowing into the pockets of CEOs. The United States would have you believe that communism is about creating a system where the government controls everything and you have no freedom. But in all actuality, the true goal of communism is to redistribute wealth and resources and to eventually eliminate inequality. And if you weren't aware, inequality is the lifeblood of capitalism. And there is no better example of that than slavery. Slavery is the ultimate form of inequality, which is why it is the foundation of this capitalist system, of this country. Slavery built this country and it continues to build this country. The United States has simply discovered new ways to enslave us. Instead of using whips and chains, they drown us in debt. They brainwash us into consuming shit we don't need, and they make sure that they never pay you enough to ever break the cycle. College loans are nothing but slave contracts. Credit cards are slave contracts. That mortgage is a slave contract. Slavery is inequality, and inequality is the foundation of capitalism. That's why America hates communism so much, because America is run by corporations. And any country that actually wants to own and control their own resources, any country that wants to be run by the people, for the people, is a direct threat to capitalism, because it means that that country is no longer for sale. And as we have witnessed with TikTok, we do not take kindly to foreign entities that are not for sale. We will either take you by force or we will get rid of you altogether.
So if someone's telling you about how so-and-so socialist or anti-colonialist country sucks so much, I want you to look into why. Poor, struggling to get access to food, medical supplies, etc., war. Can anybody think of why a country like, say, Cuba or Venezuela might not have the best living standards? I wonder if it has to do with the sanctions placed on them and the military campaigns attempted on them after they did things that massively increased people's quality of life through socialism. Because after Castro, the life expectancy rose to even higher than the US. People got free education, people got guaranteed housing, people got free universal health care. The literacy rate shot up to almost 100%, which is unprecedented, and again, higher than the US. Or say Libya and Venezuela, who had the highest standards of living out of every single country on their respective continents. Or even Burkina Faso, who's massively increasing the quality of life of their people before the US inevitably tries to f with them or bombs them into oblivion. Is it really that said countries are or were doing poorly because of socialist policies which actually massively increase the quality of life in every country that's implemented them? Or is it the fact that the US and Western countries in general sanction, bomb, and destroy said countries or ruin them because they don't appeal to their geopolitical interests?
Capitalism or socialism? People argue about this all the time, but most of you here is oversimplified. Let's talk about this and where they worked and where they have failed. Socialism starts from the idea of collective good. The state or the community owns the big resources. The goal is fairness, making sure everyone gets healthcare, education, and housing. Example, like Cuba's healthcare system, China's public transit. Even in Nordic countries like Sweden or Norway, you see higher tax funding universal services. Capitalism starts from the idea of individual ambition. Private ownership drives competition. The belief is that when people chase profit, society benefits too. Think about companies like Apple or Google, which grew by competing in open market. The US has shown how the model creates rapid growth and global leadership in technology. Both systems has limits. Capitalism brings innovation and efficiency, but also creates big gaps between rich and poor. Socialism reduces inequality and guarantees basic needs, but it often struggles with efficiency and over-centralization. Neither system works perfectly on its own, and in reality, no country actually uses a pure version of either. Like US, most capitalist, but it has Social Security and Medicare. Take Nordics, strong welfare state, but thriving private businesses. China, a socialist framework, blended with market reform and fueled with decades of growth. Every society today is some kind of mix. Now here's my question. Maybe the debate itself is outdated. What happens when AI and big data can plan resources better than market and bureaucracies? What happens when automation replaces labor and universal basic income becomes the only way to stabilize society. The future may not look purely socialist or capitalist at all. So the real challenge is not choosing one system. It is figuring out how to design economy that put people first, whether that means fairness, innovation, or both. I have a full breakdown article on Substack, link in bio, or visit grumpychineseguy.com and follow me here for more. Thank you for your support. Appreciate it. Take care.
Wait, China isn't actually that centralized. This surprised a lot of people. You think China is super top-down, like all decisions come from Beijing, and everyone else just follows orders. But that's not how it really works. Sure, China looks centralized on paper, but in practice, it's way more decentralized than most outsiders imagine. Here is what I mean. In China, upper-level officials often hold formal authority, the official title to approve things, but local officials, especially at the county and city level, often hold real power because they know the ground, control the process, and observe the risk. If they want something to move forward, they will find a way, even without clear approval from above. But if they don't want to do it, they will delay or kick the decision back up, or just drag their feet until it fades away. There is a famous thing in Chinese politics. There are policies from above, yet there are countermeasures from below. This surprises a lot of foreign businesses. They think, I got support from a top provincial leader, I'm set. No, in China, a deputy division chief, 处长, might block your project with a signature delay. A mid-level official could become the most important person in your China expansion just because they handle your land, taxes, or compliance. You need to understand who really executes, not just who makes speeches. It's not just a Chinese thing, by the way. In countries like the UK, a new minister comes in, but the real power, the permanent secretaries, career bureaucrats, who have been there for 20 plus years, they shape how things actually get done. Power isn't always about hierarchy. It's about who holds the information and who bears the consequence. That's why trust and relationships, especially at the local level, matter more in China than titles and headlines. So, if you want to do business in China, here is your takeaways. Learn how decisions are actually made, not just officially made. Build local partnerships and mid-level trust. Understand that real power in China often looks very familiar, not as different as you thought, right? I'm Yuan, a Chinese founder and scholar unpacking how this country and world really works. Follow me and check my bio page for more.